Chapter 231. Surprise Attack. 3 Yong-ho's. Target today was the dungeon located closest to the rocky mountain. Almost flying down the mountain, he ran toward the dungeon entrance without any hesitation. He heard the dungeon meerkats whimpering, but he lightly ignored it and smashed the dungeon entrance with the skills that he had earned from Chwiryong. The lights at the entrance to the dungeon that detected the intruder were turned off. The sound of the dungeon spirit's rushing steps was heard deep inside. Chwiryong threw a lighting fixture she had around her waist and drove out the darkness. At the same time, Yong-ho concentrated on his consciousness. He found the key with the power of gluttony and opened the door of space. 5 vampire lords headed by Chwiryong lined up next to him. 10 death knights stood behind Skull, holding their own weapons. At Yong-ho's order, Chwiryong, who was reborn as his loyal bodyguard as a result of true re-education, summoned the squad-level skeletons and vampire lords. When he first invaded the dungeon, there were only 4 defenders inside it, but they numbered more than 100. Now Yong-ho lightly clenched his fist. Instead of using aiming, he grabbed the sword he had picked from the armory and whispered to his subordinates, "We're going to go the most direct route." His announcement was his order. The smoke of greed rose from all over his body. Skeletons and zombies generously threw themselves to dismantle the traps. Although hundreds of dungeon spirits at the gathering site were ready to defend in unison, they could hardly do nothing. The attack by the 10 Death Knights, led by Skull, was a disaster for them. All the Death Knights were assigned to Skull's unit. Because of this, they could synchronize with Skull and show a much more brilliant performance than Yong-ho expected. The Death Knights could reach a higher level by sharing their battle experiences. Moreover, this time, Skull also benefited from them. The Death Knight's combat experience reinforced Skull further, and they further enhanced the combat power of his entire members. Faced with the Death Knights wielding their swords like one, the dungeon ministers collapsed like scarecrows. Yong-ho's greed also presented the correct path to conquering the dungeon. After smashing the resistance of non-living dungeon spirits, such as living armors and golems, Yong-ho and his subordinates reached the heart of the dungeon in no time. "Who the hell are you bastards?" Chwiryong rushed toward the master of the dungeon, shouting at her. She wasn't grabbing a whip sword as usual, but she had a whip in her hand instead. The black leather whip, which was faster and sharper than her usual whip sword, wrapped around his body quickly. As always, she shouted, lifting the master stuck at the tip of the whip high, and said, "It's time you got punished." She rolled her eyes. As expected, he was staring at her after stopping confronting Yong-ho and Catalina. She threw him down on the floor, roughly, then blushed inside her mask. After striking him down several times, she murmured as if she made excuses, "I was just absorbed in my role." Instead of asking her what it was, Yong-ho just smiled at her. It seemed to be fun to bother Chwiryong a little more, but his priority was striking the dungeon first. Catalina took the essence of the dungeon master, who collapsed on the floor after losing his consciousness. Yong-ho also went into the heart of the dungeon and extracted the essence of the dungeon. Since the dungeon's soul was already killed, there was no obstacle other than the dungeon shield. After extracting the essence of the dungeon radiating brightly, he gave them the next order, because his target was not just the essence of the dungeon only. The smoke of greed led him to a new path according to his wishes. As soon as he reached the dungeon treasure storage, located not far from the heart of the dungeon, the vampire lord summoned new skeletons to have them collect the gold and other jewelry of the treasure storage and put them in the leather sacks prepared in advance. Once the leather sacks were full, Yong-ho sent the vampire lords and death knights back to the summoning room made by the late king of gluttony. The skeletons, each carrying 1 leather sack, followed their master, the vampire lords. So when Yong-ho was done with their reverse summoning, he was left behind with Skull, Catalina, and Chwiryong. The reinforcement units from other dungeons had not yet appeared. Yong-ho signaled to them with a glance to get out of the dungeon. The night was still long, and he had lots of work to do. There were still 55 dungeons left under the command of the King of Gluttony. While Yong-ho was in the thick of attacking the dungeons, Ophelia and Tigrius were busy reinforcing Cadiz Fortress. It was clear that Yong-ho's guerrilla attack would contribute to collapsing the remaining forces of the King of Gluttony. It was no exaggeration to say that Yong-ho's attack would quicken the collapse of the king's forces by at least a month or more. That was why Yong-ho's subordinate spirits, Ophelia and Tigrius, would have to hurry up to prepare for their collapse. There was not much to worry about in the west, thanks to Embryo's destruction of the western area early on. The eastern area was now in a stable stage, and the southern area was long occupied by Yong-ho. Ophelia and Tigrius needed to raise up the army to conquer the territory of the King of Gluttony, while reinforcing the defense of the northern part with Cadi's fortress as the center. Cadi's fortress today was more of a bridgehead for attack than an axis of defense. The demon world was a place where the strong prey upon the weak. The Queen of Fury was just an ally of Yong-ho's. She was an outsider to the House of Mammon. And it was the same case with the King of Violence, whose intentions were never known to other kings. The strength of the Queen and her subordinate spirits, who could be called her swords, was enough to stand up to other kings. However, she didn't have enough forces to deter them. In some respect, this kind of turbulent times, coinciding with the collapse of the remaining forces of the King of Gluttony, gave the House of Mammon a golden opportunity to form the new forces. Yong-ho had to move fast enough to make the other kings feel that he made a surprise attack. The reason he chose to attack the dungeons close to the territories of the King of Violence or the Queen of Fury was because he wanted to reduce the dungeons that the two kings could occupy later. In that respect, Yong-ho's guerrilla attack was not just directed at the remaining forces of the King of Gluttony. In a broader context, it could be called a surprise attack against the King of Violence and the Queen of Fury. The House of Mammon was long buried in history after losing its glory in the past. Yong-ho's counterattack to restore his family's past glory was already well underway. On the surface, the current demonic world was relatively peaceful. Although the forces of the King of Pride and the King of Envy were continuing the war in the north every day, there was peace maintained in other regions even, though it was peace amid tension, but it was just peace on the surface. It wasn't just the House of Mammon that was preparing for the counterattack secretly. Other kings also continued to get ready for the war behind the scenes. The three masters who enjoyed the most power under the command of the King of Gluttony joined hands together and wrote a letter, and they urgently dispatched an envoy to the king to whom they would donate their country. Abrasax, who boasted of the strongest mana among the 5 directors of the dungeon market, once again met with the King of Pride. Originally, Orobas, who had the strongest Herculean power, was supposed to make a secret deal with the king, but neither Abrasax nor the king didn't think so. Bifrons, the most intelligent among the 5 directors, had a meeting with the King of Lust. The king was supposed to request all the 5 directors if he wanted a secret deal, but he didn't this time. It was Bifrons who made the request to the king first. The King of Lust wanted to reject the request, but he couldn't because Bifrons made the offer that he could not reject. Samael, the fastest wing, discovered belatedly that one lich had disappeared from the warehouse where the dungeon market's defects were piled up. As the one who boasted of the best intelligence power among the 5 directors of the dungeon market, she could find out easily who took lich. She knew it was Citri who was responsible for this theft. It was no exaggeration to say that she, as the oldest member of the 5 directors, simply existed in the demon world for ages. But she had been pretty active recently, and it was the new master of the House of Mammon that made her busy. Samael remembered the warning Citri gave her at the special auction house. But still, she had no intention of stopping now. Yong-ho Cheon, the new master of the House of Mammon. There was something mysterious about him, something not known at all to the demon world. Samael pulled out a letter from the office desk drawer and opened it. It was a letter related to the last secret deal requested by the King of Gluttony. Those who could move history were preparing something on their own behind the scenes, and some of their activities had an organic relationship with each other. It was peaceful on the surface. It seemed as if the current peace would continue in the future. But it was different. Their movement behind the scene would soon become a big current and affect everything on the surface. The King of Violence, returning to his own hideout place, belatedly read the letter from the Queen of Fury. In the letter, she said she formed an alliance with the House of Mammon and asked him what he would do in the coming days. "What do you think of the master of the Mammon family, uncle? Do you feel he is a good person?" "I think he is." The new King of Greed, the King of Violence, put down the letter. Instead of writing a reply, he watched over the world as the king of the greatest race of dragons. There was a gentle ripple above the water. Soon, it was clear that the current below the water would shake the whole demon world. This time, no matter how much you don't want to stay away from it, don't think you can avoid it. The King of Violence recalled the Queen of Sloth. Since she had been secluded for a long time, she was forgotten in the demon world, but she was also inevitably involved. Her contract with the King of Violence himself proved it. The giant red dragon, the King of Violence, established himself in the place where he was supposed to be after decades of absence. He closed his eyes comfortably. Past events that provoked his doubts were almost sorted out in his mind. Now, it was the future events that sparked his curiosity. The king wanted to take a nap. As an observer of the world, he was waiting for the era of turbulent times in the near future. Chapter 232, The King of the Arena, 1. Chwiryong had a dream. It was a dream that he could definitely call a nightmare. He who woke up from his dream breathed out wildly. A cold sweat broke out all over his red body. Too much time had passed. It was a very long time that he could not feel, even in the arena where he could hardly feel the passage of time properly. Chwiryong closed his eyes again. He could not dream anymore, though. However, the scenes that he saw in his dream and the fragments of his old memories came to his mind vividly. It was definitely a nightmare. But at the same time, it was a yearning dream. It could be called his good old memories. There were so many people he couldn't meet unless they didn't appear in his dream. At first, he was angry, he was frustrated, and finally he conceded that he could not reverse all of these things. Maybe he might have been tired of overwhelming time, but he was not impatient. He calmed down his troubled mind. He tried to understand what Mammon wanted. Naturally, he recalled the successor of the King of Greed, Mammon. He smiled before he knew it. Just thinking about him made him feel a lot better. Chwiryong opened his eyes again and looked into the darkness. He took a deep breath in the cold air floating in the arena and stood up. He would witness it quite soon. He would decide sooner or later, Master. He called the name quietly. He didn't hear the master's reply. He woke up from his memories to face a reality where the king did not exist. 1 month and 15 days have passed since Yong-ho mounted a guerrilla attack on the King of Gluttony's territory. He attacked 7 more dungeons during that period. Almost all of them were dungeons located in the western part of the king's territory. Lucia, who fully absorbed the essence of the dungeons, grew up rapidly and succeeded in taking complete control of the 8th and 9th floors, despite skipping the 7th floor. In addition, Yong-ho could refill Mammon's treasure storage with the gold and other jewelry he collected from the 7 dungeons. Of course, the treasure storage almost looked the same as before. In fact, there was no sign of the treasures decreasing even when he took a huge amount of gold to buy the red Titan dragon, Tiamat. Indeed, it was a huge treasure storage befitting the King of Greed. Ophelia and Tigrius developed Cadi's fortress well. It was no exaggeration to say that money ruled the world. The more money they spent, the more concrete results they got fast. 1 month and a half were never short. The long silence of the King of Gluttony was enough to make other kings have doubts about his whereabouts. Yong-ho's guerrilla attack spread little by little to the territory of the King of Gluttony and other territories. Because of this, Yong-ho temporarily loosened the reins in the attack. It was enough for him to watch how the other kings reacted before he made his next move. Time was on the side of the Mammon family. Yong-ho never wasted time. In order to make the best of the time for the Mammon family, he had to spend it well and efficiently. He attacked the arena with his subordinate spirits. He embodied the new power he gained through actual battles. And there was one more thing he should not miss. The door of the 10th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed is opened. Which of the 12 spirits is waiting for you this time? Ipita, pat, pitta pat. Yong-ho shook his head at Lucia's charming briefing. There were only 2 of Mammon's 12 spirits that he had to beat. Since the 2 won in many battles with brilliant records, Yong-ho could find out all the detailed information about them quite a bit just by browsing through a few books. It was Ares Eustia, who defended the Grand Library of Mammon on the 10th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. Nicknamed the Navigator, she was both the king's advisor and a prophet. Master, the Grand Library is a treasure of knowledge. It is no exaggeration to say that it contains all the knowledge of this world. Eustia's wisdom will also help you a lot. As always, Ammon's advice was universally sound. However, it was still a library anyway. It could not be denied that Yong-ho was more interested in the various living facilities on the 11th floor than the library on the 10th. Moreover, it was none other than Virgo that guarded the 11th floor. The 11th floor was filled with various personal spaces, including the rooms of 12 spirits. Guarding the 11th floor was Virgo Yuno, the last member of the 12 spirits. According to many legends, there were many episodes about her beauty, so it was natural that Yong-ho was interested in her as a man. Of course, it's just my curiosity, nothing more or less. Murmuring to himself like that, he looked at Catalina, who was sitting next to him. She tilted her head and fluttered her tail, as if she was curious about his unexpected glance. Just like the 10th floor suggested, it was full of powerful dungeon monsters. In addition to the Nightshade, also called the Prince of Darkness, spiritual monsters with dark attributes such as Spectre and Race were waiting for Yong-ho and his party. It was difficult for Yong-ho to deal with dark properties, especially spiritual monsters, among various dungeon monsters. It was because Yong-ho could attack them physically, and the unique energy of the dark attributes poisoned the living. However, Yong-ho already possessed not only darkness, but also the attribute of light. His subordinate spirits received the mana of the light attribute from Yong-ho through Brigada, and as always, they attacked the 10th floor fiercely. This is the entrance to the main library. It's been a long time since I came here, Ironman whispered in front of the steel door with the embossed head of the sheep. There was a deep yearning in his voice. Skull and Elagos opened the steel door at Yong-ho's order. The peculiar smell of paper came out from inside the door. At the same time, Yong-ho found himself amazed at the size of the library. It was huge. It looked like it was as large as the treasure house in terms of size. The ceiling was high enough to fit 5 floors. It was very large on the side, let alone its depth. It had only a few pillars with no separate walls, so the vastness of the library caught his eye immediately. It was no exaggeration to say that books were everywhere. It was as if even people who didn't like books felt like reading books, enchanted by the atmosphere. In that respect, it was absolutely true that Armon said that the library contained all the knowledge of the world. Kaian would have loved it here. Kaiwan recalled her younger brother before she knew it. So, she quickly changed her expression after clenching her teeth. Fortunately, no one noticed her because others were distracted by the massive library, except for only one. "Haven't you ever seen a library? You don't see me," an old woman shouted at her. Only then could all of them, who were hooked on the huge library, fix their eyes on somebody right before their eyes. Although nobody was right before their eyes, there was clearly a skinny and tall old woman sitting in the seat reserved for a librarian about 10 meters away from them. Yustia Amon raised his voice first. When the flames of the red lotus arose in the air, a smile was on her face. "Who looked like a dry old tree, Amon. You still look as great as you were a long time ago." She was wearing a black dress that covered her body up to the neck. A pair of sheep's horns stood on her neatly curled gray hair, and light emerald pupils were shining below it. Old woman Yustia, the king's advisor and a prophet. Perhaps because of her upright posture or because of her peculiar disposition, she gave out an air of confidence when she spoke or acted. Yustia, a librarian in charge of the Grand Library. As you can see, a lonely old woman. Understand me when I speak to you curtly. The oldest among the 12 spirits of Mammon Man. I've lived longer than Ayaman. At that moment, Yong-ho recalled a notorious cursing old woman he had seen on TV in the human world several times. Of course, Yustia didn't use any abusive language. Yong-ho stepped forward and introduced himself. "I'm Yong-ho Cheon, the current master of the Mammon family. You're great. You don't look like a mere successor. Nice to see you anyway. Since you're the legitimate successor, I can't say anything short. Please understand me if my tone is a little messy." She laughed heartily, then turned her eyes at the flames of the red lotus instead of talking to him. She asked, Amon, how much time has passed?" "I don't know because I was asleep while the door was closed. 1,000 and hundreds of years have passed." She closed her eyes at his reply. 1,000 years was never short, even for her who had already lived such a long time. "Much more time has passed than I expected. Too much time has passed. But it's not all bad. The passage of time must have devoured the traitors. It might be much better for guys like Gusion." She spoke eloquently. Yong-ho and his subordinate spirits focused on some of her words. Traitors who must have been devoured by the passage of time. That turned out better for Guzyan. It was obvious that her mention was related to Mamon's death. Yong-ho opened his mouth. Yustia opened her eyes. She looked straight at Yong-ho and said, "Hear it from Guzyan, not me. It would be best for Guzyan to tell the story of Master Mamon to you." She wasn't strict. Rather, it was more like the kind of advice that a grandmother gave to her grandchildren. She shrugged again and said, "But the order is in a mess. You came up to the 10th floor, but you have yet to conquer the 7th floor. Yustia, you know the arena well, don't you?" When Armin replied indirectly, she frowned. Then she hysterically said, "I wonder if the previous masters of the Mammon family have been piled up in the arena over the last 1,000 years. He didn't have to reply. Armin just ignited the flames of the Red Lotus, and Yong-ho made an awkward expression. Yustia said with a sigh, "Oh, my God. Dang it, Guzyan. I knew that damned arena would devour the Mammon family. The lineage of the Mammon family has been carried on for over 1,000 years, even when its masters were caught in the arena one by one. But I can't say that this is also bad. That means the accumulation of power in the arena is tremendous." Chapter 233, The King of the Arena. 2. She was no more fussy and cold-hearted. Yong-ho even felt she was a pleasant woman. "Oh, I think I talked about useless things too long. An old woman like me shouldn't take away our prince's time anymore. Come here. Let me hand over my power." Yustia suddenly beckoned to him. Surprised more by what she just said than her calling him a prince, he asked instinctively, "May I ask if you have any test?" Since she looked like an old woman, he used honorific language before he knew it. Besides, he recalled his grandmother he had seen in the human world only a few times. Yustia clicked her tongue, then said, "Nope. As a prince, you have only greed but also gluttony, let alone half of the 12 spirits of the House of Mammon. Besides, you were formally recognized by that fastidious old man Magdadon. What more tests do I need to give you now? Tests are just cumbersome stuff to me. Come over here quickly. Let me hand over my power to you right now." She just wanted to get it done quickly. Kaiwan and the other subordinate spirits were all smiles. When he sat right in front of the desk, Yustia signaled to him with a glance to reach out. He held out his right hand without hesitation. She overlapped her dry and wrinkled hand on his right hand, then said slowly, "My power is patience. Doesn't it perfectly suit an old woman like me?" He smiled awkwardly at her instead of replying. Instead of putting him on the spot, she injected her power into him. A subtle gray color had been added to the magic field on his left arm. "Don't worry too much because you are going to make Guzyan your subordinate spirit. Then Skathash. Of course, you have to make Richard your subordinate spirit. I think I can join them lastly." She laughed, then let go of his hand. Then she opened the desk drawer one after another and pulled out a thick stack of cards. "I feel sad if I have to leave after just handing over my power to you. I'm not a heartless woman. As you know already, my nickname is the Navigator, as well as the King's Prophet. Of course, in a world with so many possibilities, you can hardly make a prophecy. Identifying the big trend comes from insights based on information." She moved the cards busily in her hand. The cards looked like tarot cards, given the way she mixed them. But using these cards can also help us prepare for the future. Isn't it better to rely on the small starlight to find the way, rather than drifting in the vast sea? With a warm smile, Yustia put a well-mixed stack of cards on the desk. Just like before, she looked into Yongho's eyes and said, "Then let me read the fortune for your love, the eternal subject of interest for the young people. How about it?" "Well, as for my love horoscope." He tried to ask her for another horoscope because he heard Catalina flapping her ears and tail, but even before he finished, Kaiwan cut in, "I hope Hez in your great hands." Yongho looked at Kaiwan, but she looked at Yustia only. "Okay, then let me take a look at our prince's love horoscope." Speaking like an actor, she drew a card from the stack of cards and laid it on the desk. Not only Catalina and Ophelia, but all the subordinate spirits gathered around the desk and looked at her fingertips. Right at that moment, Kaiwan asked in a rather sharp voice, "Wait a moment, why are you drawing 3 cards?" Yustia laughed insidiously, and Kaiwan and Catalina looked at Yongho at the same time. He raised his hands to show his palms to prove his innocence. "Now then, I'll turn the cards over." While they were rolling their eyes sharply, Eustia turned over one of the cards. Everyone turned their eyes at the card again. How about writing a letter to him first? Kirtimuka said, wearing the shawl she received from the Queen of Fury for the 7th time this month. Her master, the Queen, who was like her younger sister and daughter, stopped moving her fingers for a moment. But she soon resumed sewing. It seemed like she wanted Kirtimuka to support her with more specific action. Kirtimuka covered her mouth with her hand, because she could not hold back her laughter at the Queen of Fury acting cute. About 2 months had passed since the alliance between the Queen and the House of Mammon was made. During that period, there were no exchanges between the Queen and the master of the Mammon family. In some way, that was natural because there was no reason for them to communicate with each other on a daily basis just because they were allies. Rather, frequent exchanges between them would be a red light. It was common that there were few exchanges between allies unless there was a war involving one of them, which was widely accepted not only in the demon world but also in the alien world. Nonetheless, the Queen of Fury was nervous and impatient. At least in Kirtimuka's eyes, she seemed so. Otherwise, she would not have shown such an eccentric behavior as making dozens of clothes in 2 months. Kirtimuka stopped smiling and looked seriously at the Queen. As the head of Gandharva, she was young. Just because she was born with the power of sin, she ascended to the position of Queen, representing not only Gandharva, but also the entire 8-clan people. But from the perspective of Gandharva, who lived for hundreds of years, she was still only a young girl. Kirtimuka wished for the Queen's happiness. That was why she stopped cracking a joke like she did in the first place, and considered her marriage quite seriously. It seemed that the master of the Mammon family had several women who looked like his lovers, but this was not a big problem. Each head of a lord's house was said to be the king of a small kingdom. It was very important for them to continue their family lineage, so it was common in the demon world that the master maintained polygamy or monogamous marriages. Particularly, the 8-clan people decreased in the process of escaping from the northern area, so it was common to allow any form of marriage as long as they could produce many offspring. Dhritarashtra was a queen with the sin of fury. Moreover, she led the people consisting of 8 clans. It was no exaggeration to say that it was a fait accompli for the Queen of Fury to become the official wife of the master of the House of Mammon. The moment they married, the marriage of the two was not just a union between a man and a woman, but a union between the 8 clans and the Mammon family. Although it might sound repugnant, their union could be described as a political marriage. Moreover, it would be a marriage between the Queen and the master of a prestigious house. Ideally, the House of Mammon would be absorbed into the Queen's 8 clans, which would not go against the common sense of the demon world. Kirtimuka didn't mention this kind of formality at all, because she didn't want to offend the Queen's thrill of first love, though it came to her belatedly. It would be okay for you to convey your best wishes to him in a simple letter. Since you have formed an alliance with him only recently, you might want to exchange gifts that would promote your friendship with him. The Queen pricked her ears at her suggestion. Kirtimuka waited, and the Queen slowly raised her head and moved her hands. She said after pretending otherwise, promoting friendship. Yes, promoting friendship is necessary. Kirtimuka cheered her up again. The Queen opened her lips slightly. Then she said reluctantly, as if she could not help it because of Kirtimuka's repeated recommendation, "Then shall I do?" That Kirtimuka nodded happily. However, another one cut in at that moment. "I am opposed to that. I don't think it would be nice for you to show him that you are impatient. When you are pulling hard to get, timing is very important," said Gardimundi. She flew through the open window into the Queen's room. Kirtimuka tried to complain about her intruding into the room without passing through the main door, but the Queen acted first. Standing up quickly, the Queen was no more a laughing girl but the ruler of the 8 clans. She looked at Gardimundi because she was holding a small red box in her hand. Instead of arguing with Kirtimuka, Gardimundi approached the Queen and knelt. She handed over the red box to the Queen. The reply from the King of Violence has finally arrived. The box made of a red dragon's scales meant the letter was written by the King of Violence himself. The Queen took a deep breath after receiving the box. She was tense and nervous before she knew it, because she received his reply in about 3 months. Kirtimuka, who overreacted when it came to the King of Violence, waited for the Queen to read the letter, with her face stiffening like the Queen. Gardimundi was also tense now, though she was in a jolly mood at first. The Queen of Fury took the letter out of the box and opened it. The voice of the King of Violence came out of the letter cast with a spell. My decision to move the Dragon Core was to keep the King of Gluttony in check. I never intended to threaten you, so don't worry about it. Osses. The Dragon Core will stick to their current position. Unless they are attacked, they will never attack first, so keep this in mind. C. I heard rumors about the master of the Mammon family. I think he is more than qualified to be the target of your alliance. T. It would be nice if we could build a sincere relationship with him. The Queen smiled at the King's brief comment, because she liked not only his viewpoint of Young Ho and the reason why he moved his troops. The King of Violence was not an enemy to the Queen. He was an ally. That fact alone could relieve the Queen. Kirtimuka openly breathed a sigh of relief. Although she feared the King of Violence and watched out for him, she still trusted him. She couldn't even imagine that the great dragon would act foolishly enough to deceive his master with a fake letter. But Gardamundi was still tense, because the King of Violence continued, Dhritarashtra, Queen of Fury. Bolts. If you have truly made an alliance with the Mammon family, and if you intend to maintain that alliance, move more actively. Don't just be content with forming an alliance, but use the power of the alliance. If you can, use me and the Dragon Legion. The choice is yours, as always, to watch your choices, as always. That was the end of the letter. The Queen of Fury put the letter back in the box and flopped down on the seat she was sitting. Chapter 234. The King of the Arena 3. There were some other things in the second half of the letter. The Queen of Fury was by no means a fool. By inferring from the King of Violence's comment that she could use the alliance actively, she immediately understood what the king proposed, or what kind of advice he offered. The King of Pride and the King of Envy are at war. Because of this, they won't be able to concern themselves with what's going on in the south, said Gardamundi. Kirtimuka opened her eyes wide after grasping the true meaning of their conversation in the end. Are you going to join hands with the Mammon family and attack the King of Gluttony? The Queen did not answer. She thought of the alliance for defense, not for an attack. Gardamundi said again. The King of Lust did not intervene in the war between the King of Pride and the King of Envy. It's highly likely that he would remain an onlooker this time again. The current turmoil could be an opportunity for us, too. Her analysis made sense. The King of Violence's Dragon Legion itself was a threat to the King of Gluttony. If the Mammon troops and the Queen's army were marching into his territory from the south and the west respectively, the King of Gluttony had no choice but to divide his army into three. The Queen could devise such a plan because the power of the House of Mammon was much more mighty than she thought. Although her plan was quite up in the air, she could win the war if she made the decision to act. But that would be the first strike on her part. In other words, the Queen of Fury would start a war, something she had never thought of. Of course, it was not the first time the Queen conceived of such a plan. Although she didn't reveal it to anybody else, she considered it many times from the moment she thought about forming an alliance with the Mammon family. Besides, some of the heads of her 8 clans secretly asked her to take the lead in the attack. Your Majesty took the lead in every battle because you wanted to minimize the damage on both sides. Gardamundi approached the Queen and knelt on the floor to talk to her at her eye level. It's not different. It's based on the same logic. It is clear that if you save the King of Gluttony, you will bring about a great disaster someday. At a time when the North is in turmoil, we have to stabilize the South. If you succeed, the King of Pride won't dare to invade the South even if he beat the King of Envy and took everything from him. The Queen closed her eyes. She knew what Gardamundi was talking about. Her point was reasonable and attractive. But this would mean the start of a war. She could not make the decision to start a war by exchanging a few words with her close aides, nor she should not Gardamundi. Yes, Your Majesty. Please ask the master of the Mammon family for a secret meeting. I want the meeting in 15 days. It would be nice if I meet him at the same place as the last one. There was no excitement or thrill on her face anymore. Gardamundi felt heartbroken about it, but nodded. Politely bowing to her, Gardamundi stood up. She threw herself out of the window and flew away. Kirtimuka. Kirtimuka flinched at her calling. The Queen caught her breath again. She recalled her 8 clans who were on standby all the time, preparing for a possible war with the King of Pride because of the turbulence he brought about. The queen said with a sigh, "Please summon the heads of the 8 clans." She didn't make the decision yet. She had to hear their opinions first. Kurtimuka left the room. The Queen of Fury looked down at the clothes she stopped sewing and closed her eyes instead of holding the needle. She tried to regain her composure in the darkness. "Now, calm down and listen. It will be a lot of fun if you can guess who the woman this first card symbolizes." After telling them gently, Eustia removed the hand that was covering the card. On the card was a picture of a knight standing with his back in the twilight. These cards that symbolize Eustia drew several cards in succession and laid them out on the desk. She presented 3 cards again. "Oh my God. It's been a while since I saw this kind of card." Catalina and Kaiwan looked tense. In particular, Catalina, who thought of Shadow in the night standing with his back in the twilight, gulped because she thought it was her card. Eustia said, "Let me give it to you straight, instead of beating around the bush like the fortune teller who thinks of it as his own monopoly. The owner of this card was born under the star of a pushover. Besides, she is under the protection of a drunken dragon. Nobody could deny it's a useless pushover. There was one among Mammon's 12 spirits who was born with this fate." "Are you referring to Alun?" Kaiwan immediately asked. Catalina covered her face with both hands, about to cry. Eustia giggled at her and continued, "That's not necessarily bad. The one who is protected by the drunk dragon is unlikely to die, even though she will suffer from distress and sadness. I would say she is very resistant to bad luck." "Is it good for her?" Catalina asked with her ears drooping. She seemed to ask Eustia why she was teasing. Her Eustia chuckled once more and explained about the rest of the cards. "This woman is showing her faithful love to the prince more than anyone else. If you can guess who she is, you had better be nice to her." Having said that, Eustia glanced at Yongho and Catalina flapped her tail. "Here is the second card, Queen." Everyone's eyes focused on Kaiwan when the woman on the card was standing with a whip. Kaiwan thought the woman on the card was her, but she was embarrassed because of the straightforward description of her figure. "Oh my, why?" Kaiwan asked hurriedly, because Eustia's expression was not bright. Shaking her head violently, Eustia said, grinning at her, "I don't know who she is, but she has a crush on our prince. She is deeply loving him. She pretends to be arrogant and lofty, but she is like a very dedicated and obedient angel to the prince." Everyone turned their eyes at Kaiwan again. She blushed. "Oh, that's not true," she retorted. They responded with a gentle smile when she tried in vain to deny it. At last, she pinched Young Ho's waist for help. "Now then, let's look at the third card. Lastly, I see this one on the card resembling our prince." Catalina and Kaiwan, who were suffering from embarrassment, looked at the card sharply. Even Yong Ho looked at the third card, pretty much tense this time. He could not figure out who the one on the card was. Eustia quickly flipped the card over and placed new cards from the stack of cards in succession. She immediately interpreted without having them wait for her reply. "It's a pure virgin. Haha, this girl is also born with the star of a pushover. She is also protected by a drunken dragon, but she seems to be a good friend of the first woman." In other words, the two sympathize with each other. Catalina blinked, and Kaiwan looked at Yong Ho. However, Yong Ho was tilting his head. Even if this woman matches the key words of a virgin and a pushover, he could not figure out who she was. She is just a possibility at this point. As I said at the beginning, it is impossible to make absolute prophecy in a world where there are so many possibilities. Eustia cleared all the cards at once, then leaned her skinny figure against the back of her chair. She turned to Yong Ho and said, "I'm tired because I am talking too much after a long time. Prince, can I stop here and see you later?" Yong Ho obtained the power of patience with her formal recognition. Since Lucia was still too weak to take over the Grand Library, he did not have much more to do here. "Take good rest then." "Thank you, Prince." Ophelia and Tigrius showed interest in the library's collections, but they could do it some other day. The two left the library with regret, not to mention Elagos and Skull. Young Ho, who looked around the library once more, was about to turn when Eustia whispered to him, "No one can predict when the storm will blow, but I don't think it's good for you to put off making Guzian your subordinate spirit too long. The Mammon family needs more power to confront the storm." Young Ho nodded. After bowing to her politely, he left the main library. It wasn't just because of Eustace's advice. For the past 1 month and 45 days, he always stayed in the arena, except when he attacked the dungeons of the King of Gluttony. It was time for him to keep the promise he had made to Skathash. The night had passed, and the morning drew on. He headed to the arena and faced Guzian. Time passed fairly everywhere. When the sun set and rose, another day began for everyone, as always. A war was going on in the north. The forces of the King of Pride and the King of Envy were engaged in a fierce battle every day. Outsiders criticized this battle as a boring, protracted war to avoid the final showdown, which was undeniable. However, from the standpoint of those involved in the fighting, it was never a boring, protracted war. When the fighting began, people died and got injured. It was true that the forces of the King of Pride won a series of battles, but that did not mean they had no casualties. A considerable number of dungeon spirits of the King of Pride were killed in action. It was definitely the same day as always. However, when the confrontation in the morning was over, the King of Pride issued a new order. Like he did 15 days ago, the king advanced some of his troops to attack the dungeons belonging to the King of Envy. Fighting broke out both inside and outside the dungeons. The fighting was so fierce that they wanted to behead those who ridiculed the war as a protracted confrontation. Although both sides sent only a 15th of their total forces, that was the only military strength that those directly engaged in the fighting could turn to. Each of their lives was at stake. Yaxini, one of the dungeon spirits, barely breathed, falling on the ground. Covered with blood, sweat, and tears, she could not see anything before her eyes. Shouts and screams coming from everywhere deafened her ears. Yaxini was from the clan of Yaksha, one of the 8 clans under the command of the Queen of Fury. Just like her clan was treated so in the north, she was a slave. She foamed at the mouth. She found it hard even to breathe now. She felt extreme pain in her left arm. Then she had no feeling in it soon. Only the pain she felt when her bones and flesh were crushed tormented her. Screaming was continuing everywhere. Yaxini felt a strange silence amid the miserable screaming and angry shouting. Maybe this was the peculiar sensation she felt at the moment of death. Chapter 235. The King of the Arena. 4. Fortunately, she didn't feel anything like a kaleidoscope. Living as a slave in the north was a continuation of misery. She didn't want to suffer in the past until the moment she was dying. Today was different from yesterday. Yaxini felt it. It was not limited to her as an individual. It was sort of some intuition, something like the unique superpower of a member of her clan who was awakened to it right before she died. Yaxini tried to open her eyes. The tears that ran down her cheeks washed away the impurities around her eyes. She couldn't even rub her eyes. She barely opened her eyes and looked at the sky. As if they were outsiders watching the war in the north, the sunlight was pouring out so hotly. Blood splattered around her again. Something big and heavy fell down with a thumping sound, and the battle around her gradually moved to another location little by little. It was because the tide of the war was decisively in favor of one warring country. It looked like the pattern of repeated fighting over the past few months. However, Yaxini felt something definitely different this time. It was funny. She was now on the verge of death after being dragged onto the battlefield as a mere slave. What she felt different from yesterday was meaningless to her, despite the reverse of the tide of the war. However, Yaxini stared into the sky desperately, as if she had a fever. The flying vehicles and giant flying spirits that she wished she could ride one day made a huge shadow over her head, making everything around her dark. She realized something in that darkness. She now understood what was different. Today was clearly different from yesterday. It was clear that tomorrow would be more different. The Queen of Fury stared straight ahead with her face stiffened. She was not in Vimana, her home and fortress. Standing in a temple located in the center of her territory, she was waiting for the heads of her 8 clans. The temple was circular, and it had 8 pillars. The Queen of Fury was the head of the 8 clans, but she was different here in this temple. She was not recognized as the queen, but only as the head of the Dhritarashtra Gandharva, one of the 8 clans. Because of this, she was equal to the heads of the other 7 clans. She never reigned over them, nor was she trampled from below. Dhritarashtra felt a strange sensation. It was too ominous for her to blame it. For her being nervous, Kirtimukha and Gardimundi, who always took care of her, were not here. It was only the heads of the 8 clans who could stand here, where they would determine the future of their people. Dhritarashtra clenched her fist and pulled herself together. She felt a bit relaxed when she recalled the face of the master of the Mammon family, just like Kirtimukha advised, although she blushed as a side effect. A fresh wind blew. It was the wind caused by Biryubakcha, the head of the Garura clan and Gardimundi's father, while he was descending from the sky. The tall, red-haired and bearded Biryubakcha bowed to Dhritarashtra, who also returned his greetings by lowering her head. As if he was heralding the arrival of other heads, they began to appear one after another in the temple: Deva, Dragon, Yaksha, Gandharva, Asura, Garura, Kalavinka, Maharaga. It had been a long time since the heads of the 8 clans gathered in one place. Moreover, this was not a meeting where the Queen of Fury and the heads of their own clans attended. She came here as the head of the Gandharva clan, not as the Queen of Fury, which was very significant. As the head of the Gandharva clan, I would like to make a proposal to you, head of your own clans. She slowly opened her mouth. Her cold and calm voice was different from her usual affectionate voice, or her harsh voice resonating on the battlefield. The heads of the 8 clans already knew why she called for the meeting at the temple. They listened to her. According to the tradition, the meeting went smoothly. However, while chairing the meeting, she suddenly looked up at the sky before she knew it. Something was different. She couldn't figure out what it was exactly, but she felt it was different. She struggled to suppress her anxiety. She continued to talk in front of them. She proposed they would attack the territory of the King of Gluttony. Sitri raised her head. It seems that she took a nap before she knew it. The cat wagon flying through the sky already landed on the ground. The carriages of the 5 other directors lined up on the roof of the main store of the dungeon market, located in the center of the demon world. It took some time for Sitri to wake up from her memories. She looked at the other wagons with her half-closed eyes. They were 4, all told. Apparently, all but Sitri herself already arrived. She wasn't late for the appointment. There was still a little more time left before they could see face-to-face at the meeting, which was not a meeting in a virtual space. It was unusual for the 5 directors to actually get together in one place, but it was already the 3rd time they met this year, which meant that the demon world was in turmoil. Sitri once again gently closed and opened her eyes. Finally, she woke up from her memories and looked at the present. She swallowed the cold air at the main store of the dungeon market, which was shrouded in darkness night and day. Although it was close to the sky, she felt wistful at the moment. She stood up from the carriage, frowning her eyebrows slightly. The reason they called the meeting today was because of the agenda of the King of Gluttony. As someone who had been more enthusiastic about a secret deal than any other king, the King of Gluttony not only broke the secret deal unilaterally, but also he was not seen for more than 2 months. As for the simple seclusion, the Queen of Sloth and the King of Lust secluded themselves for a long time, which was nothing new to the 5 directors. Moreover, unlike the King of Lust, the Queen of Sloth could not exert a great influence on the demon world because she did not have any big power. The King of Gluttony had been very active before he was missing. Whatever the reason, his disappearance could have a great impact on the entire demon world. Of course, Sitri already knew why the King of Gluttony suddenly disappeared, but she had no intention of commenting on it at all. Just like she did, as always, she would retire when the time came. As one of the founders and the longest-serving directors of the dungeon market, she was content with her current role. While walking through the corridor heading deep into the building, Sitri recalled Yong-ho. A smile was on her face before she knew it. He looked like Mammon, but at the same time, he was different. She loved him for that all the more because that little difference proved that Yong-ho was Mammon's child and that he was his true successor. Nobody knew it except for Sitri herself, but it was Mammon who drafted the plan on the dungeon market. As a true king, he envisioned the dungeon market for the revival of the whole demon world. It was because of Mammon's wish that the dungeon market supplied food at a low price, while giving up big profits. Mammon had devised lots of more things. The current dungeon market was somewhat different from what Mammon originally had devised. But Sitri wasn't greedy. Although she was the longest member, she was only one of the 5 directors. Maintaining the current food supply policy of the dungeon market was in her best interests. In return for that, she retired from her active role. It was because she was exhausted, But the biggest reason was because she wanted to keep the food supply policy in return for giving up her authority and influence, and she did. She passed the long corridor and reached the conference room. Other directors were already seated at the circular table that was identical to the virtual space. Orobas, the strongest power. Bifrons, the most intelligent Abraxas, the strongest Mana Samael, the fastest wing. Orobas greeted Citri with a glance. At first glance, it might seem an amorous glance, but Citri knew he didn't mean it. He was the oldest director after her. Bifrons was seated with his 8 eyes closed. He seemed to have sensed that Citri arrived, but he didn't move at all. As always, Abraxas sat weirdly and fiddled with strangely shaped toys. After saying hello to Citri with an insidious smile, he focused on the toys again. "How are you?" Samael greeted her with a gentle smile. She forgot what happened at the last special auction house. Because of this, Citri responded with a bright smile. Citri sat in the only empty seat at the table and greeted other directors. Bifrons opened his eyes. Abraxas was giggling after putting the toys back into his bag, and Orobas greeted Citri again. Samael hid his deep feelings with a gentle smile. Citri buried herself in the chair and drooped her shoulders. It was the same meeting, as always, but somehow she felt different this time. Bifrons opened his mouth and proclaimed the beginning of the meeting. The arena was quiet. It seemed as if the cold air blocked all the sounds of the world. Catalina flapped her long ears and looked at the stand. In addition to the previous masters of the House of Mammon, there were many other people gathered. All the arena spirits also gathered in one place. Kaiwan laughed bitterly, Ophelia shuddered lightly, and Eligos swallowed. Tigrius fixed his eyes far away. Skull stopped walking. He watched Yongho stepping forward alone without stopping. He crossed the stand and stood in the arena. He looked at the man on the other side. "Did you know it's today? Because I lived long enough, I had something like a premonition." Guzian laughed brightly. He was wearing a leather combat suit instead of his usual black suit. Red heat was arising from the black gauntlet that he wore on his fists. "You're the first to challenge me on the top floor." It was really long. It had been over 1,000 years. Finally, the king of greed had returned. Yongho was the successor who inherited all that Mammon had longed for. So much. Guxian spat out the cigarette in his mouth. He said, grinning like a child, "Let me tell you in advance, I'm not going to give you a break. Even if I am defeated and become an arena spirit, I won't regret it." Yongho also smiled at his provocative declaration. He laughed heartily and wore the silver dragon armor. Grasping the air, he got the flames of the red lotus. Then he released the sins of greed and gluttony. 6 towering horns on his head. They were clearly the power of the king. Yongho was on par with the 6 kings who ruled the demon world. Gusion admitted it calmly. Then Gusion released all the power available to him, even though it was less than that during his heyday. 6 horns arose above his head. Gusion had Herculean power. He possessed the strongest short-range attack power among Mammon's 12 spirits. Except for Amun, virtually Mammon's alter ego, he was the strongest among them. He was a legend and a living myth. "Come on, you who challenges me, the king of the arena." Yongho saw him and did not delay any more. He rushed, creating the flames of angry greed. Gusion was the king of the arena. At last, the 2 titans clashed. Chapter 236, Gusion 1. The weight of years was heavy. It was never easy, even for those mighty beings who lived for more than 1,000 years, to remember the things of the distant past. It was even hard for them to count the number of their past events. Thousands and tens of thousands of days were blocking the gap between now and the past. But Gusion remembered it. He could vividly recall what had happened more than 1,000 years and an even more distant past than the day King Mammon died, as if it were yesterday. He watched the king from behind the king's back view. He once decided to follow him. He was immature in those days. "Master, my lord, my king." Gusion looked at the present, not the past. At that moment, he saw a man rushing toward him in an eternity of moments that had been split every second. The successor of the king and the man who resembled the king but looked different. Gusion clenched his fist with a hearty laugh. He moved on fast. He focused on the present with the time that started flowing again. He clashed with Yongho. There was a big roar when they clashed. The time he climbed the 30th floor, Yong-ho could not use the power of his subordinate spirits. He could bring out the power of Mammon's 12 spirits through Mammon's godly energy, but he could not inside the arena. Therefore, his fighting on the 30th floor reminded him of his final battle with the king of gluttony. And that was the same when he fought on the 39th floor, the top floor of the arena. Hitting the ground hard, he activated the heart of the demon god. Without going through the Jew step gradually, 5 of the 7 claws immediately penetrated his chest. It hurt. At the same time, however, he felt power was soaring from inside. He pondered over it overnight. His fight against Chwiryong was not supposed to last long. For nearly half a year, he had been with Chwiryong. Given that the passage of time was not so clear in the arena, he might have spent more time with Chwiryong than he thought. Chwiryong did not spare his power. Since the day Yong-ho first asked Chwiryong to teach him, he tried to pass on to Yong-ho everything he knew. So, Yong-ho knew that it was impossible to maintain the distance with him, or to make use of his superior mana to engage in a protracted fight. There was only one way for him to defeat the beast named Chwiryong, which was the primitive battle between the power of the two. Yong-ho was determined to demonstrate all his power available. Chwiryong might have felt the same way. This was going to be a fierce battle. Yong-ho concentrated. Chwiryong clenched his fist. Yong-ho tightened his legs and hit the ground. With tremendous power, he traversed the space quickly. He saw Chwiryong throwing his punch. There was a clashing noise. It wasn't something hitting against each other. Their fists clashed against each other in the air. When the clashing sound exploded, Chwiryong punched him, which gently touched his cheek. Yong-ho avoided his first blow. Needless to say, it was a miracle. As the strongest red demon, there was no mistake in Chwiryong's punch. Since his body and mana worked together at the moment he intended, Yong-ho could not discern the flow of Chwiryong's mana as he used to. That was why it was a miracle that he avoided Chwiryong's fatal blow. It was impossible for him to explain how he avoided Chwiryong's attack. Maybe he did it instinctively, or by experience. Yong-ho's eyes moved. He looked over Chwiryong's huge left arm. His eyes met Chwiryong's. Chwiryong was laughing. Bang! There was a deafening roar for the second time. Once again, a miracle happened. Chwiryong rotated his body, then threw his right punch, but it missed the target. Before his punch broke the ground, Yong-ho rushed toward him bravely. He rotated his body in the same direction as Chwiryong and stood behind his back. The waves that shook the atmosphere reverberated on the ground this time. The ground that could not withstand Chwiryong's mighty punch was torn in all directions. Yong-ho moved his right hand. He didn't sense the moment he did it. At the moment, no one could have guessed. Amon, with ultra-high green flames, became a flash of light. Chwiryong punched his jaw while the magic spear of Amon cut through the air. Chwiryong, getting close to Yong-ho, threw a punch for the second time. His punch bounced out. A shield of distortion released from his left hand, twisted the trajectory of Chwiryong's fist. Both eyes met over Yong-ho's silver dragon armor, which was smashed by his punch. The two launched another attack against each other. There was a series of roaring whenever they clashed. Their close-range fighting brought about unimaginable results. Their mana collided. They hit, then avoided each other's attack. Since their fighting was straightforward and simple, it was so intense and fierce. Chwiryong's armor was stained with blood. The leather clothes that covered his red upper body were already burned with the green flames. Yong-ho wasn't that different from Chwiryong either. The silver dragon armor was already in tatters. Each time he attacked Yong-ho, its fragments scattered in the air. They now sped up their attack. The breathless fighting seemed to blow away Yong-ho's consciousness at any moment. On the other hand, Chwiryong felt extreme joy. It wasn't just because Yong-ho was fighting better than he expected. He just took great delight in fighting itself. While over 1,000 years were passing outside the arena, Chwiryong trained himself. He didn't care about the loss of mana caused by the death of his master, Mammon. He was a red demon who fought physically. Although his mana was weak, he was not weakened. He was still the strongest red demon ever. Bang! There was a change in his blazing fast attack. Instead of attacking Yong-ho, Chwiryong soared vertically. He jumped more than a dozen meters at once and rotated his body. He hurriedly raised his head and rushed down to Yong-ho with a mighty punch. His vertical attack was like a meteor burning the atmosphere. Chwiryong's striking was so powerful as to break everything on the ground, but it missed its target. but he didn't care. What he wanted from the beginning was not to destroy Young Ho. The air shook with the release of mana. The floor of the stadium collapsed at the moment his punch hit the ground. Hundreds of fragments that lost gravity because of his overwhelming force scattered into the air. Young Ho saw him amid the chaotic moment. As Guxian was on the offensive, he was not distracted by anything around him. He threw his right punch toward Young Ho, who missed the chance to counterattack in the fast-changing environment. This time, Guxian didn't use his fist. Instead, he grabbed Young Ho's left hand with his right hand. Without ever crossing each other's gaze, Guxian used his Herculean power. Guxian let out a powerful force by swinging his right hand as hard as he could. Young Ho screamed. His left arm was torn out. His muscles were torn and his bones broke. The shock of his left arm being ripped from his body made him feel hazy. Guxian threw away his left arm. Blood gushing from his left shoulder splattered over him and Guxian. Guxian didn't clench his right hand, which tore off his left arm. With the fragments of the destroyed ground falling down, Guxian resumed his attack. Young Ho couldn't avoid or prevent it. None of that was allowed. For the first time since they fought in the arena, Guxian mounted a perfect attack. Young Ho, who was struck between his left chest and waist, was thrown away tens of meters and hit against the wall of the stadium. He felt like his body was being smashed just by the impact of it colliding against the wall. Guxian saw Young Ho. He was squirming, stuck in the smashed wall of the stadium. Guxian clenched his teeth. Without any regret, he moved toward Young Ho. As he promised to Young Ho at the start of the fighting, he needed to beat him and end the fighting. His decisive attack created this situation. If Young Ho had struck him down decisively, he, not Young Ho, would have fallen on the ground. Guxian raised his head and looked outside the stadium. Kaiwan and Catalina were crying. Ophelia was trembling, squatting on the stand. Elagos denied what was happening before his eyes. Tigrius gnashed his teeth with his eyes closed. Only Skull stood firmly, facing Guxian. Guxian turned his gaze from them. He took another step. He grabbed his right hand stained with Young Ho's blood. The flames of the Red Lotus blocked him at the moment. It was a waterfall of fire, starting from the Red Lotus. It became the green flames. A huge chunk of mana engulfed Guxian. Guxian felt the presence of Armon from the flames. United with Young Ho, Armon was different from his other subordinate spirits. Even inside the stadium, Armon could enforce his own intentions. Armon's efforts were useless. Guxian generated mana and grabbed the curtain of fire with both hands. He pushed Armon out, who was rushing toward him without giving up. The fight was already over. Young Ho could not beat Guxian in his current situation. He was so wounded that he could not even stand up. So, Guxian had to wrap up the fighting now. The curtain of fire was gradually split. Guxian looked straight ahead, stepping through the gap of the splitting curtain. Young Ho was sitting among the fragments of the collapsed wall. Barely raising his upper body, he raised his right hand. Guxian looked into his eyes and felt great joy and sadness together. Fighting spirit was still burning in his eyes. Young Ho opened his lips. Guxian was tens of meters away from him, but Guxian could hear his voice, so he hurried. He urgently released power and tore the curtain of fire. Then he rushed to Young Ho. Young Ho saw him charging toward him. Instead of closing his blurry eyes, he grabbed his chest with his right hand. He managed to speak it out. Synthetic reinforcement. He could not put it off anymore, nor should he. A green light was flaring up in his eyes. Once again, Aemon intercepted Guxian rushing toward him. The waves of the green flames helped Young Ho gain time. Mana, the target of the synthetic reinforcement, began to swirl in the heart of the demon god. Greed and gluttony roared at once. The moment Guxian finally crossed all the waves of the green flames, a strong light arose. The sixth claw was triggered from the heart of the demon god, who became united with Young Ho in a true sense. The arena beyond the fighting area reverberated. A terrifying mana was released from his body, along with the green flames. A temporary seventh horn in the shape of light came out between the six horns. Young Ho was exhausted, and his bones were broken. Even handling the released mana was difficult for him. He didn't even know how long he could stick it out. Nonetheless, he could still fight. Guxian laughed. He burst into laughter before he knew it. He gladly clenched his fist. Young Ho also laughed. With his right hand, he grabbed the air. Then he stood up and let down the magic spear, Aemon, the Red Lotus. The two looked at each other, then fought again. Chapter 237. Gusion 2 Now. The fighting between Yong-ho and Gusion was completely different from when they fought first. There was nothing like a hair-breadth escape or continuous counterattack. It was literally a primitive fight. The two attacked and counterattacked. They only thought of beating each other with a stronger attack. They slugged it out. Gusion's punch twisted time and space. Hundreds of thousands of Gusion's punches rained down on Yong-ho's body like an avalanche. But Yong-ho penetrated the avalanche with his secret weapon. The godly energy of fury took hold of the space around Aemon instead of jumping through space. The avalanche crashed. The fighting ground could no longer withstand their battle. Mammon's shield protecting the stand was long destroyed. Not only Yong-ho's subordinate spirits, but also the arena spirits shuddered at their fierce fighting. Once again, blood splattered in the air. The two instinctively felt they reached the limit of their physical strength. Gusion's left arm did not move. Yong-ho's mana, which was going up endlessly, was slowly disintegrating. There was not much time left for his survival. The two stopped attacking all of a sudden. They burst into laughter at the same time. Since they were covered with wounds, their laughter was misery itself. They even threw out blood simultaneously. "Young master, you're a real tough cookie. Our fighting was too long. Let's stop here and go see Scathach." They laughed again at their feeble voice. Both knew their next fighting would be the last. So they didn't need any more talking. Gusion clenched his fist. Yong-ho concentrated all his power on Aemon. The two clashed again. Both engulfed each other. Yong-ho's green flames and Gusion's red mana not only brought about a huge impact, but it also generated enormous light and heat. A shockwave hit them at the same time, Gusion thought, falling on the ground. Even though he lost his right arm entirely, he felt something else rather than pain. Master. He felt dizzy. He was overcome by fatigue that he forgot while fighting. It seemed like he would lose consciousness anytime soon. But still, his heart was beating. Gusion didn't close his eyes. He clenched his teeth to maintain consciousness, even though his vision was already blurred. He felt the strong, fishy scent of blood in his nose. Gusion recalled one day in the distant past. The day was like now, but different. It happened more than 1,000 years ago. He smiled even when he was almost dying. Today was not that day. But he could see something similar to what had happened on that day. Unlike Gusion, Yong-ho was standing, his left arm, torn out in a mess, looked disgusting. Since he couldn't stand properly, he leaned on Aemon, using him as a cane, but he didn't fall. He staggeringly approached Gusion. Now the fighting was over. Yong-ho won. Gusion couldn't stand it anymore. Tears flowed from his eyes. "My king!" His low voice soon became magic. He broke the invisible chains that held Gusion and many others around for many years. Mammon's shield was lifted. A pure white light covered the entire arena. "Master." In the light, Catalina was crying loudly, which she kept holding down until now. She was about to run toward him crying, but Kaiwan held her. As a former spirit of the arena, Kaiwan instinctively realized what kind of moment it was now. She also wanted to cry her eyes out like Catalina. She held it back. She had to watch the reunion of the king who finally returned, and his vassals. Eligos supported Ophelia, who couldn't stand up properly because her legs became wobbly. Tigrius groaned with admiration. The lifting of Mammon's shield that lasted for more than 1,000 years was a spectacular scene itself. Instead of laughing heartily as always, Skull breathed a sigh of relief. He then looked at his master with purple eyes. Since the shield of the arena was dismantled, Yong-ho and Gusion also recovered their original bodies. Their armor in tatters, as well as exhausted mana, were not perfectly restored, but they managed to face each other in a respectful manner. The spirits of the arena stood behind Gusion. They showed due manners to the new king and their new master by raising their weapons. "My king, the great king of greed who has finally returned." Gusion did not hide his tears. He raised his clenched fist on his chest. Then he led the chant on behalf of the arena spirits. "Gusion and the 112 spirits here swear allegiance to the master of the labyrinth of greed." His oath was simple but strong. Followed by Gusion's chanting, the arena spirits raised their voices at once, which displayed their magnificent dignity. Armin didn't shout separately. In fact, he was so moved that he could not speak at all. He felt the same way as Gusion. Yong-ho felt a bit embarrassed because of their resounding voices, but he was a king now. As Gusion declared, he was the master of the labyrinth of greed. He felt a little awkward, but he smiled at the arena spirits. Then he got down to the point briefly and said, "I hope him in your good hands." The arena spirits laughed here and there. Catalina and Kaiwan ran quickly and hugged Yong-ho, who was pushed back and fell on the ground. Gusion smiled faintly and sat down. Normally, he could hold their hands gently one by one, but he couldn't do it now. Instead of standing up, he just lay down and looked up at Gusion. He then said, hugging Catalina and Kaiwan, "Okay, then let's go recover right away." Gusion blinked. Each time Yong-ho smiled, he felt like he had a sharp pain in his stomach, but he once again smiled at Gusion and said, "Aren't we messed up? Then, we should go to the hospital. I'm a little worried if I can walk to the first floor in this condition." Gusion looked up and looked at the entrance to the arena. After watching it blankly for a long time, he barely opened his mouth. "Master," he called it shortly. Gusion raised not only Yong-ho, but also Kaiwan and Catalina with his big hand, but Skull, who was excellent at doing something in a timely manner, stretched out his hand and removed the two women from Yong-ho. Gusion pointed to the ceiling by moving his chin. "Let's go now." Yong-ho allowed Gusion to carry him on his back. At that moment, he listened to Lucius' voice while hanging on Gusion's back, which was pretty large. "Oh my God. You are in the arena right now, right? Nonetheless, you have got to be connected to me, right?" He didn't bother to answer. He left the arena with Gusion and headed to the Garden of Life, where Skathach had been waiting for them. When they reached, Skathach was already crying. Hugging Uria, at a loss of what to do, she cried her eyes out like a child. She cried and even had a runny nose, but she didn't care. Only the mansion located in the middle of the lake was the space allowed for Skathach. Since she couldn't step out of the mansion at all, she settled on the edge of the mansion. She waited for Yong-ho and Gusion at a place close to the entrance. Quick-witted, Lucia had the Skull unit open the door in advance. As a result, the moment Gusion entered the hallway, he could see Skathach from a distance. Gusion ran. Skathach got up from her seat and leaned against the invisible wall. She cried out Gusion's name. And finally, the distance between the two disappeared. Gusion hugged her with his large hands. Uria, who was in Skathach's arms, got barely released and staggered while Yong-ho bounced off his back and rolled on the floor. However, neither of them were displeased. "Where are Gusion and Skathach now?" Kaiwan, who came up late, asked, looking at Yong-ho, who was still lying down on the floor. Yong-ho, who was covering Uria's ears with his hands for some reason, smiled bitterly and pointed at Skathach's mansion with a look. Catalina, who had the best hearing among the Mammon spirits, pricked her ears several times and then covered her face with both hands. Suddenly, not only her ears and face but also her neck turned red. "Well, they're making great love in 1,000 years, said Ophelia. Elagos and Tigrius simultaneously cleared their throats. Yong-ho whispered into the air, "Lucia, don't sneak a peek at them. Just focus on your work. You have to take control of the 7th floor." Lucia, sure. I'll start taking control of the 7th floor. Pite pat. Oh my. Tai. Let me start right away. Fortunately, only Yong-ho could hear it. Yong-ho pleasantly watched Skathach's mansion. After breathing out deeply, he felt good he could obtain all the arena spirits, including Gusion, by conquering the arena. But what pleased him more was the dramatic reunion of Gusion and Skathach. Shall I postpone my work until tomorrow and pass out here? Although he was physically all right, he was mentally exhausted. It was because he was so inert as to stand up that he still lay on the floor. Moreover, the side effects of his reliance on the demon god were greater than expected. If he had turned to him in a place other than the arena, he could have suffered even more side effects. Right at that moment, the flames of the Red Lotus arose from his bedside. It was Aemon, as always, my master. Aemon's whispering was delivered not only to Yong-ho, but also to the other subordinate spirits. All of them felt warmth from the flames of the Red Lotus. You have conquered the arena, and you will make Gusion your subordinate spirit. Gusion could be said to be the beginning of the domino. Now, Scathach was going to join Yong-ho. If Gusion and Scathach joined him, it was highly likely that Richard would also follow suit. Just like Kaiwan said, Yong-ho's possession of Mammon's 12 spirits was within his grasp sooner or later. Gusion's power is courage, which was something that made him never give up in the face of any ordeal and overcome it. There is no other power that suits him perfectly other than that. Given his role as the king's vanguard, Yong-ho agreed with a nod. Kaiwan, who had spent the longest time with Gusion, smiled warmly. And Ayamon paused for a moment, then created even greater flames. He said, looking directly at Yong-ho. Now you're fully qualified as the master. It was clear what he meant. Yong-ho responded instinctively. Mammon, the king of greed. The greatest monarch in the history of the demon world. He suddenly disappeared one day. He disappeared from history, believe it or not. Mammon's 12 spirits knew the truth. However, they could not speak, bound by some prohibitions. Now all those bans were lifted. Yong-ho finally got the right to hear the truth. I agree with Eustia. I think it is best to hear it from Gusion. The flames of the red lotus flickered again. He whispered, "You don't have to be in a hurry. Because it's just a once-upon-a-time story." His voice was scattered. The flames faded away. Yong-ho saw the godly energy of Mammon on his left arm. He felt only a small beating from the heart of the demon god who was united with him. Time passed fairly. Various events were happening outside the Mammon house, in the north and west, as well as in the center of the demon world. A day had passed. The war in the north continued. The meeting between the Queen of Fury and the heads of the 8 clans didn't produce any consensus about the Queen's proposal, given the significance of the matter. And the meeting of the 5 directors of the dungeon market was somewhat different from what it was before Yong-ho and Gusion faced each other at Scathach's mansion. Gusion, as always, did not drag on needlessly. He started telling the truth about Mammon, holding Scathach in one arm. It was an old story dating from over 1,000 years ago. Chapter 238, King's Time 1. The subordinate spirits of the House of Mammon began to gather at Scathach's mansion. It was almost noon. Gusion looked calm. Although there was still fatigue on his face, he didn't fail to smile. It was yesterday when he fought a deadly fight with Yong-ho. Even though he took rest all day long, he was not fully recovered, so Yong-ho delayed making him his subordinate spirit later. Actually, he summoned them for a different reason. Each of them took their seat comfortably. The blue water, which could be called the specialty of Scathach's mansion, served as a jelly-like chair where they leaned comfortably. "Okay, master. May I reel out the story from now on? I would like to start." Then, holding Scathach's waist with one arm, he spoke somewhat awkwardly. Yong-ho responded with a more awkward expression. "That's enough. You don't have to use honorific language. Just tell me as you used to. I'll treat you the same as I did before." That's why I like you, master." He gently grinned at Yong-ho, then gave up using honorific language. Leaning on his chest, Scathach also giggled. "All right, where should I start talking? Actually, I've been imagining this moment for the last 1,000 years, but I find it rather hard to speak in front of you like this." Yong-ho did not press him. Ammon, who arose in the air as the flames of the red lotus, also waited calmly for his words. Finally, Gusion opened his mouth. "It's a thing of the distant past. It happened 1,000 and hundreds of years ago when Master Mammon was still alive." Scathach fidgeted with her fingers to help Gusion. Some of the blue water went up and became a map of the demon world in the distant past. About half of the demon world was unified under one name. There happened all sorts of strange things in many parts of the estates, or the territory of greed, ruled by Master Mammon in those days. For example, a whole dungeon or a small town disappeared altogether. Kaiwan leaned forward when he used the expression, "disappeared," she asked with a glance, and Gusion nodded and continued. Sometimes a dungeon evaporated without leaving behind even a single piece of it, and sometimes the city was destroyed as if it were attacked, since there were survivors left behind. This strange phenomenon was known a long time after it happened initially. Nobody knew when and where this kind of bizarre phenomenon occurred. It was because there was no guarantee that it would occur only in the village or a dungeon. At the end of the day, Master Mammon began to investigate the bizarre incidents in earnest. but he had not made any progress. He just doubted it might be some sort of twisting or earthquake in the affected area or dungeon. But it was too weird to call it a simple twisting. It was possible for the being created as the twisting to destroy the surrounding area, but it was impossible that the village or dungeon disappeared altogether, as if the whole affected area was torn down and taken into another world. Chwiryong grabbed a part of the water that formed the map of the demon world. Although it was a model, he erased part of the demon world and continued. The more Master Mammon investigated the incidents, the more severe the situation became. The bizarre phenomena increased as time passed by, and the damages of the affected areas increased as well. In some cases, the affected dungeon was fine, but all the people inside it died without any wound, as if only their souls escaped out of their bodies. Chwiryong paused for a moment. After catching his breath once, he continued. While Master Mammon was in the thick of investigating the events, the Queen of Sloth in the neighboring country visited him. Actually, the Queen of Sloth was investigating the same phenomenon in her country. If that's the case, this kind of strange thing didn't take place only in the territory of the King of Greed, right? Asked Ophelia. Chwiryong replied with a nod. You're right. That's the point. This strange thing occurred throughout the demon world. This was happening not only in the territory of the King of Greed and the Queen of Sloth, but also in the territories of other kings. Chwiryong reached out for the map of the demon world. Then there popped up small holes everywhere on the map. Then he erased it one by one. About 6 months have passed since Master Mammon started investigating this strange thing. Finally, Mammon discovered the cause of this weird phenomenon. To tell you the conclusion, it was the result of twisting. However, it was different from the usual twisting. Beyond the twisting was an alien world, which was not the same demonic world. Moreover, the alien world was too much different from the numerous worlds that had a temporary passage to the demon world. Until then, it was a very special world. Chwiryong took a silver coin out of his pocket. Then, he made it float in the air with mana, which was round and flat. It can be compared to both sides of a coin. It could be called the twin of our demon world. A world that has been always connected to the demon world, but a world where people could not meet us in the demon world, nor should we. The silver coin that Chwiryong floated in the air rotated round and round. Everyone's eyes turned to the back of the silver coin, which was not visible at first. The twisting that occurred from that alien world affected the demon world. Sometimes it evaporated the whole area, and sometimes it absorbed all the souls around the twisting. In some cases, the beings that came from the twisting were engaged in destruction. The first 2 cases were particularly problematic. If this kind of phenomenon were allowed to continue, the entire demon world could collapse. This alien world was the twin of the demon world, but at the same time, it would bring about the destruction of the demon world if something went wrong. Chwiryong grabbed the silver coin and whispered, Master Mammon called the world a celestial world. In many cases, the meetings of the 5 directors of the dungeon market proceeded with the participants reading their one-sided reports, and that was the same when they met face-to-face instead of meeting in the virtual space. As a result, the meeting was short as a rule. When the 5 directors met, their meeting usually didn't last more than 2 hours, but this time, the meeting lasted long. They couldn't wrap up the meeting in a few hours. Dubbed the strongest manner, Abrasax called for another meeting on the 2nd day. Indeed, they convened a second meeting when Bifrons, the best intellect, agreed. Actually, they already discussed all the important agenda at their yesterday's meeting. Orobas, the strongest Herculean power, looked at Abrasax with a curious expression, and Samael also showed great curiosity about the second meeting. Abrasax, who was dragging on without any interesting agenda, put down the toys he was playing with. Then he casually said in passing, Today the King of Pride will attack the King of Envy. It was nothing new to the participants. In fact, for the past several months, the King of Pride and the King of Envy were engaged in fierce fighting. Citri tilted her head slightly, feeling out of place. Abrasax raised his head and looked at her. Then he said, grinning at her, Some of you already know what I mean. Citri narrowed her eyebrows. The 5 directors looked at each other. Right at that moment, some already began to move. There was a huge twisting between the celestial world and the demonic world behind this very bizarre phenomenon. Unlike other twistings, it was not temporary. Other twistings continued from the existing, twisting that was always active. Scathach's water drops became one and created a large map of the demon world again. One of them was separated and placed high in the sky. It's the door to the celestial world. Mammon had to close the door. Only then could the demon world be protected from this bizarre phenomenon. Now, Chwiryong began to speed up the flow of the story. Ophelia, who kept swallowing while listening to him, asked quickly, "Wait, why is it so unilateral? If the celestial world is a twin of the demon world, aren't they supposed to be equal?" "I don't know about it, but what was clear was the fact that the power of the celestial world was like poison to our demonic beings. Those of us with weak mana had to lose their lives simply by being exposed to the power of the celestial world. Only those with at least 3 horns could fight, even when exposed to the power of the celestial world." When he replied, Ophelia made a blank expression. He mentioned at least 3 horns. It meant that only a handful of people in the vast demon world could confront the celestial world. In no time, Master Mammon could find where the door was located. However, shutting down the door was not easy, because our master found the existence of the door too late. Not only was the power of the celestial world abundant around the door, but there were also too many beings from the celestial world. Gusian paused for a moment. Chapter 239. King's Time 2. It was just Gusion only who was talking. At first, everything went smoothly, but the situation became different when they were finally about to shut the door of the celestial world, faced with their fiercest resistance. Yongho closed his eyes. Kaiwan also clenched her teeth. Catalina bit her lips, hoping what she thought was not true. The King of Pride, the King of Envy, and the King of Lust betrayed Master Mammon. The Queen of Sloth didn't betray him, but that's it. The situation was irreversible by that time. Gusian frowned as if he was about to shed bloody tears at any moment. Alun was killed first, followed by Baruna and Yuho Yuan in the fierce fighting. All the 12 spirits of Mammon were severely wounded. Yongho could remember it at that time. He recalled it when he peeked into the memories of Citri and Mammon. Gusion was crying, shedding bloody tears, and Alun died in Citri's arms. Fortunately, Master Mammon survived, but he did not choose to leave the scene. Gusion let down his shoulders. His angry tone now subsided. The door of the celestial world was too wide open. If he backed down, he couldn't promise the safety and survival of his country. So, Master Mammon decided to. The flames of the Red Lotus were burning high. Scathach put her hand on Gusion's. Gusion cried and laughed while talking, recalling the unforgettable king, who he had never forgotten for more than 1,000 years. Gusion said, "He climbed the stairs to the celestial world alone. He chose to sacrifice himself to save the demon world." Abrasac soon erected 7 horns. As if his nickname, the strongest mana, was not fake, he took control of the surrounding area with his enormous mana. Almost at the same time, Bifrons and Orobas also opened their horns. The combined mana generated from the 6 horns became united with Abrasac's, increasing the density of mana. It was literally a choking pressure. Samael, the fastest wing, hurriedly opened her horns to confront their mana, but it was in vain. Abrasac's mana was thrust into her like a serpent and tied her up. As if closing a bottle cap, he crushed her mana with his stronger mana. Citri also suffered the same thing. The mana of the 3 other directors squeezed her body. Abrasac said, "I was thinking of executing it a bit slowly. Just like I did to Orobas and Bifrons, I took the time to try to persuade Samael and Citri as well, but the situation was so urgent that I could not help it." Abrasac shook his head, then made a smile humorously by twisting his beak. "The King of Gluttony was dead. I don't know who killed him, but he died anyway. Even the 10 warriors that he boasted of so much were also killed. So what should I do? Wouldn't the dog that lost its owner have to find a new owner?" Samael opened her eyes wide at his words that the King of Gluttony was dead. Abrasac couldn't hide his joy. There is no longer the territory of the King of Gluttony, because the dogs who found a new owner hoisted up a new flag. Probably there is a big turmoil there by now. They must be engaged in fighting each other, calling each other traitors. The 3 masters who used to enjoy a powerful force under the King of Gluttony chose the King of Pride as their new master. They reported to the king about the death of the King of Gluttony and the 10 warriors, but they also pledged to devote their entire forces to him. Now, it was time they kept their pledge. The 3 masters who changed their master under the red sky were probably having a bloody feast. Their first mission was to annihilate the puppet king and a handful of loyalists. They had to get rid of the king of gluttony's remnants to dedicate the king's whole territory to the king of pride. The king of pride will attack the king of envy. The king of lust can no longer resist him. Today the northern area will be unified under the king of pride, Orobas said in a low voice. Abrasax laughed even louder. The dungeon market will follow him. Our role as a preposterous charity organization is over. We're going to join hands with the king of pride to go beyond the north to unify the whole demon world. The dungeon market had the power to control the entire demon world. However, they used it only in business deals. Besides, they didn't do the business properly. They were just content with handling the business as usual. By playing the book, Abrasax hated it. He wanted to use the power of the dungeon market for a more valuable cause. We will reorganize the demon world. It would be nice if we could remove all the hybrid clans from the alien world. Don't you think the demon world will be much more beautiful and fresh? He spoke casually, but Samael couldn't stay still. The number of what the purists called hybrids in the demon world was several million. Are they going to kill all of these hybrids? How could he mention it so lightly? Samael could not even say they were crazy. She could not just stand her anger surging inside her. The best intellect. Bifrons opened all of his 8 eyes. He said, watching Citri and Samael. We don't have much time, like Abrasax just said. I know the atmosphere is a bit coercive, but I want you to make the decision now. The dungeon market was like a beast with 5 heads. If any of the 5 heads differed with the other heads, it had to be cut off. Only then could the demon called the dungeon market could exert its united power. Orobas took a step. As the strongest red demon of his time, he did not hide his murderous intentions. Choose whether you will go along with us or you want to be killed. Mammon climbed the stairs alone. Since he chose to die alone, he forced his 12 spirits to return to the demon world. There was not enough time. Because of the influence of the celestial world, he could not use his ordinary magic to have them return. He had to break their will to stay with him. For this reason, their forced return was as good as sealed. Sending Aemon back to the demon world, he left the rest up to Magnodon. Amon and Scathash didn't see him afterward because they were asleep for a long time. But Gusyon was a little different. Like them, he didn't see Mammon, but he could hear from the previous masters of the House of Mammon who visited the arena about what happened afterward. The traitors went all out to destroy the House of Mammon. They also concealed the fact that the door of the celestial world ever existed in order to bury their disgusting and ugly betrayal in the dark. Master Mammon's sublime sacrifice was hidden, and the House of Mammon fell, and 1,000 years passed. The king of pride, who led the betrayal, died, and the king of lust practically chose to seclude himself there. King of envy, who was always controlled by another king, was on the verge of losing his country to the new king of pride. Gusyon was now done. He told them all he knew, but Yongho had a lot to ask. Why did Mammon want his 12 spirits to not reveal this truth? Why did he arrange for only the master who was duly qualified to know the truth? That was not all. He had more questions about the 12 spirits, but what he actually asked Gusyon was quite a different question. What was the Queen of Sloth doing at the time? 3 of the 5 kings betrayed Mammon, but the Queen of Sloth didn't. Then, what happened to her? What was she doing when the Mammon family was collapsing? Was the Queen of Sloth betrayed as well? Was that why she secluded herself? Gusyon laughed bitterly and replied with mixed feelings of love and hate. The Queen of Sloth stayed with Master Mammon until he climbed the stairs. She fought with us 12 spirits. While the House of Mammon was collapsing, I am not sure what she was doing at that time, but it is clear that she has been upholding one of the late Mammon's wills. Yongho stopped breathing. The puzzles that were messed up in his mind were put together, but he didn't have the specific evidence. He was sure who she was. She was that woman, Citri Mammon, she murmured to herself. She then shouted, shrugging her shoulders, Mammon. She called it out loud. It looked like she was about to cry at any moment. It wasn't because she was afraid of Orobas' threat. The dungeon market that she used to know was broken. One of Mammon's wills was once again defiled by the King of Pride. What did you say, Mammon? Orobas asked again. Citri didn't bother to answer. She closed her eyes and withdrew one of the attributes of her power, seclusion. The three directors felt it at the same time. Something changed. A weird force arose among the mana of the three directors that filled the conference room. Samael felt Abrasak's mana surrounding her distorted. Abrasax was startled. Bifrons and Orobas hurriedly concentrated their mana to overpower Citri. But it was impossible. 7 horns of light rose above Citra's head like a crown. The mana she released all at once drove away their mana. And Citri was satisfied with that moment. She reached out into the air. Through the ring, she summoned a lump of Brigada into the air and grabbed the godly energy of Sloth in the shape of a cane, which was a fragment of the flesh of the demon god, Citri. She was the strongest force of the dungeon market, as well as the founder of the dungeon market, following the will of Mammon, the king of greed. The queen of sloth released her power, the sin of sloth, after 1,000 years. Chapter 240. Blitzkrieg 1. Tears kept flowing from Citra's eyes. She hugged Elune, who was covered with blood. Her body, which was getting colder little by little whenever she put her lips on her forehead, did not move this time. She could not believe Elune's death, let alone the other's death. But it was all true. She could not deny the stern fact. And now, she was faced with the reality she wanted to deny. Most, her whole body ached. Her bloody body creaked before she hugged Elune. This space with the strongest celestial power in the demon world was a land of death even for Citri, one of the 7 deadly sins, Citri cried. She squeezed her voice to say something, again tightening her arms holding Elune. Don't go. It was harder than she thought. Her wet voice was small. It was difficult for her even to add one more word. It was also because of the power of the celestial world, but she was overwhelmed by the emotions. She could not control the overflowing feelings. Citri once again opened her mouth. Don't go. Please, please. She couldn't say anything anymore. Dozens of words came to her mind at the same time, but none of them came out of her mouth. What she barely squeezed from her mouth was her desperate appeal to Mammon. Her master Mammon faced her. Although her face was messed with tears, he touched her beautiful face and kissed her forehead and lips. That was his way of expressing his goodbye. His fleeting kiss made her wake up to the grim reality more sharply. A world without Mammon, which would disappear forever in a moment, scared her. Why? Why should you go? Why only you? She shouted out loud. It was a damn world. It was a filthy world full of dirty traitors. She could not understand why Mammon should sacrifice himself in such a situation. Why should Mammon bleed for those traitors? There were lots of things she wanted to say to him. She wanted to reproach herself for this deplorable situation. Mammon smiled at her again and said kindly, because only I can do it. Because I am the king of you and everyone. It wasn't simply because he had the sin and godly energy. He was the king, the leader and the navigator who would lead everyone. And because it is mine, since both you and this world are all mine, wouldn't it be natural for me to keep what's mine? His statement befitted his position as the king of greed. After wrapping up his words playfully, Mammon kissed Citri once again. Citri wanted to show him her own smile, but in the end, she could not help but cry again. So she just begged him to take her. Mammon glanced at her lovably. He touched Elune's hand, which was still warm, and quickly stood up. The sky was twisted. The sky that should be red got mixed with blue light. There was really little time left for him now. Mammon looked up to the sky. Still smiling, he said to Citri, I will be back. Citri couldn't go with him together. Since it was his wish, she had no choice but to let him go alone. She wiped the tears with her bloody hands. She clenched her teeth to hold back her tears. She vividly etched the memory of him going along into her mind. Mammon went alone. He climbed the stairs leading to the celestial world. The end of the sky, Citri. Everyone pricked their ears when Gusion mentioned her name all of a sudden. Although the name suddenly popped up, Ophelia and Kaiwan understood why Citri's name was mentioned. There was astonishment on their faces. Yes, Citri is none other than the Queen of Sloth, said Gusion calmly. Skathach made a sad smile at that. Catalina could not make head or tail of what was going on. Of course, it wasn't her fault. Gusion's mention of Citri was so shocking to everybody. With his eyes wide open, Eligos was aghast. With the exception of Yongho, Eligos was the one who met Citri most within the Mammon family until now. It seemed Gushin had to give them more background explanation. Chwiryong made an expression as if she was about to shout loudly at any moment, but she held it back to the end. She was now suppressing herself. Yong-ho closed his eyes. Citri's face and voice distantly came to his mind. Why Yong-ho didn't ask Gusyeon why Citri was the queen of sloth. Opening his eyes, Yong-ho looked straight at Gusyeon and asked, "If Citri is the queen of sloth, why are you resenting her?" As Gusyeon admitted, Citri fought with the Mammon family. She did not betray Mammon like the other kings. If that was the case, why did Gusyeon resent her? Gusyeon smiled at his question, but his expression was far from a smile. He replied with a rather weary voice. The alliance of the 5 kings to save the demon world was a good thing. It's fantastic when you hear it, but Master Mammon knew that the reality was not that simple. It is only possible in a fairy tale for those who are fighting against each other until yesterday to join hands to fight together for their common ideal goal. And that was the reality. In fact, the 3 kings, kings of pride, envy, and lust, eventually betrayed Mammon. We 12 spirits did not trust the rest of the kings, so we opposed our master's alliance with them. But the Queen of Sloth, Citri, made the case for the alliance. She encouraged Mammon to form the alliance, arguing that if the 5 kings joined hands, they could solve the current crisis. Gusyeon knew Citri believed the use of the alliance truly. In fact, Citri really believed their alliance would solve the problem facing the demon world. So, it was Citri who was more shocked than anyone else by the betrayal of the 3 kings. Skathak tightened her hand holding Gusyeon. Gusyeon laughed awkwardly again and said, "Yes, I know I was probably stupid. Maybe I might have needed someone I wanted to hate." Actually, Gusyeon couldn't stand it without hating somebody. But for it, he couldn't face the house of Mammon that collapsed in return for saving the demon world. Gusyeon could no longer continue. Skathak gently smiled at him, touching his hand. She wrapped it up on behalf of him, but it's water under the bridge now. There is no more threat from the celestial world. The king of pride, who was the main instigator of betrayal, disappeared amid the passage of time. We still have the king of envy and the king of lust, but I wonder how we should deal with them. Even now, when she closed her eyes, she remembered that time. It was an unforgettable memory. But the passage of 1,000 years made her calm down. Master Mammon was worried about us until the end. He had another concern while sending us back to the demon world in a hurry, for it was so obvious that we 12 spirits would cry out for revenge. Yong-ho recalled Asclepius at that moment. While he was confined to 1,000 years of guilt, he became a madman. Perhaps he must have thought of revenge before he went crazy. Skathak closed her eyes, then cleared her voice before continuing. Master Mammon didn't want his successor, who would appear someday, to be passively entangled in our revenge efforts. That's why he wanted his successor to realize the whole truth, only when he could take control of his 12 spirits. Actually, Yong-ho came to know the whole truth only after he could take control of Mammon's 12 spirits, like now. Skathak opened her eyes again and looked at him with a calm and affectionate look, as always, not with an expression full of revenge. "Young master, you're now our new master. We will follow your will." Yong-ho moved his lips a bit. Catalina let down her ears with an anxious look, and Chwiryong just swallowed, looking at him. Skathak said again, "I'm not trying to pressure you. I'm not arguing for taking revenge right away. Too much time has passed for that. Now I understand what's in Mammon's heart. Mammon didn't want us to pursue blind revenge. When Yong-ho obtained the heart of the demon god for the first time, Mammon's memory told him that he should pursue his own path and live a life based on his choice. That was what Mammon wanted. Like Skathak said, he wouldn't have hoped that his successor and 12 spirits would be bound by revenge alone. Yong-ho nodded. Skathak once again considered his feelings. As if to control Gusyeon, who got impatient at the moment, she pulled his arm gently and said again, "Shall I change the topic a bit? Since you guys heard about this all of a sudden, let me answer your questions. If you have any questions about Citri or what happened on that day, I'll answer it. Just feel free to ask any questions. You won't necessarily focus on Master Mammon."